We are now a little less than 2 months away of Joe Biden becoming the 46th president of the United States. And a question on many people's minds, particularly immigration professionals, is how successful will Joe Biden be in his immigration agenda? You see, in the 4 years that Donald Trump has had as president, he's done a lot of damage to U.S. immigration law. There's a lot that Joe Biden will need to clean up. And while Joe Biden seems to have the resolve to address all the problems that Donald Trump has created with U.S. immigration law, there's a question of politics. Is the politics right to correct everything that Donald Trump has done? Now, there's an awful lot for us to address, and for this reason, this is the first of a two-part video. Next week, we'll address the second half of all the things that Joe Biden needs to do in order to clean up after the Trump legacy on immigration. My name is William Kovach, and I am a trained immigration lawyer. I've often been disappointed in the way immigration issues are talked about in the media, although it's not always their fault. Immigration law can be a very complex subject, touching upon constitutional issues as well as personal political points of view. My goal is to explain immigration law to you, concentrating on looking at judicial opinions and executive actions in order to explain how immigration law can have an impact on our community and on our country. I hope that you'll join me as we try to make sense of immigration law and how it may affect the average person. I want to start by addressing the enforcement priorities of U.S. immigration and customs enforcement. In particular, I want to address the millions of people who are present in the United States who are undocumented. President Barack Obama understood that ICE had limited resources in order to enforce the immigration laws with respect to the millions of people who are already inside the country and undocumented. And for that reason, he released a memo that outlined the priorities for ICE in using those enforcement resources. So Obama instructed ICE to concentrate its resources on those aliens who were a danger to the public safety or the national security. He had them concentrate mostly on those aliens with criminal histories. So Donald Trump and his cronies come along, and their argument is, well, everybody who's in the country illegally is a criminal. Trump made no distinction between those aliens who are here in order to try to earn money and send it back to their families, and those who are members of dangerous street gangs like MS-13. And to blur the line and promote this lack of a distinction, President Trump publicized many cases when an undocumented alien had committed a violent crime, making it appear as though undocumented aliens committed such crimes in disproportionate numbers. And we know that's not true. We know that aliens, including undocumented aliens, tend to be more law-abiding than even natural-born citizens. And initially, when Donald Trump took office, we thought there was going to be widespread domestic enforcement against those undocumented aliens present here. In fact, there was a large outcry over the way ICE was starting to enforce the immigration laws. They were starting to do raids in places that were pretty much seen as out of bounds before Donald Trump. For example, enforcement actions were taking place outside churches, in state courthouses, where, for example, undocumented aliens who were women and were abused were making claims against domestic partners who were U.S. citizens. They would come out of the courtroom and find themselves being arrested by ICE. Enforcement actions took place in schools when undocumented aliens were either dropping off their kids for a day at school or picking them up. And enforcement actions were taking place outside of homeless shelters. So it appeared that ICE was just breaking an unwritten rule that it wouldn't go to these types of places in order to engage in enforcement actions, in order to arrest suspected undocumented aliens. But here's the thing, even though Donald Trump expanded the list of priorities, that didn't lead to a larger number of removals. In fact, quite the opposite. The number of removals dropped under Donald Trump when you compare it to the removals under Barack Obama. For example, if you take 2013, when Barack Obama was still in office, there were over 133,000 removals of undocumented aliens who were inside the United States. And of that, 110,000 were aliens who had criminal convictions. Now compare that to the height of the removals under the Trump administration. That happened in 2018. In that year, there were 95,000 removals of undocumented aliens from inside the United States, and of that, 70,000 were aliens with criminal convictions. This meant that during the Trump administration, there was actually a drop in the number of removals by about 30% from the height of the Obama removals. And removals of aliens with criminal convictions dropped about 36%. So, despite all of his promises to make America safer, in reality, Trump's expansion of the priorities was a huge failure. It made America less safe by removing fewer aliens with criminal convictions. Now, we have every reason to believe that Joe Biden will reinstate the priorities that Barack Obama had in place. That is, we have every reason to believe that Joe Biden will instruct ICE to focus its resources on those undocumented aliens who present a danger either to the public or to the national security. And counterintuitively, this will probably mean that we can expect a rise in removals from people who are apprehended from the interior of the United States and a rise in the number of removals of aliens with criminal convictions. Which leads us to a discussion of the removal process itself and immigration court. Now, in my experience as an immigration practitioner, most of the non-criminal aliens who are in immigration court were people from Central America who were just trying to send money back home, but at the same time were trying to escape either gang violence or domestic violence in the Central American countries from which they came. Now, President Obama had instructed the ICE attorneys to engage in a process known as prosecutorial discretion. That is, going through the removal cases that were pending in immigration court and seeing if there were cases where they could just agree to administratively close the case instead of seeking actively the removal of that particular individual. This went hand in hand with Obama's list of priorities. So people who had criminal convictions, they were not likely to get prosecutorial discretion. But people who had a decent claim towards asylum or withholding of removal, well, then we can expect ICE to come back and offer something like prosecutorial discretion, that is, administratively closing their removal case. And if this was a strategy with respect to one of your clients, one of the things you did is you made sure that the client had a colorable claim under asylum or withholding of removal or the Convention Against Torture, and you would file an application. You would let that application pen for the right amount of time, say at least 180 days, and then apply for work authorization. And then, once work authorization was granted, you would negotiate with the ICE attorney and get the case to be administratively closed. Technically, the removal case still existed. It was just closed and no actions were taking place. And while it was closed, your client had the ability to apply, usually every year, for a renewal of the legal right to work in the United States. Now, Trump and his cronies, they hated this process. You can see that in the Federal Register notices from the most recent changes to the asylum regulations. They considered these fraudulent cases. So the Trump administration took a drastic step to try to end the ability of somebody to engage in this type of practice. They did so by changing the regulations that applied to asylum seekers who were looking to get the legal right to work in the United States. And among the things that the regulations changed, it ended the 30-day deadline for USCIS to make a decision on an application for work authorization from an asylum seeker. It expanded the waiting period, which was 150 days after filing your asylum application, as the time when you can file for work authorization. It was expanded to 365 days. And the regulations completely eliminated the ability of an asylum seeker to get work authorization 180 days after filing the asylum application. And in doing so, USCIS caused widespread consequences. These were consequences that were going to be felt not just by people who were filing what the administration thought were frivolous applications. These were consequences that were going to be felt by legitimate asylum seekers. Putting all of these roadblocks in the way of legitimate asylum seekers to get work authorization, well, that was going to cause a lot of financial hardship for the asylum seekers who are present in the United States. As it is, asylum seekers cannot work legally until they apply for work authorization. They're not allowed to do that. It was initially until 150 days after filing the asylum application. Now it's a year after filing the asylum application. So a lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland, and the Trump administration has lost the preliminary rounds of that litigation. A preliminary injunction has been issued, although not on a nationwide basis. Now, changing the regs is a purely executive action. As long as the executive complies with the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act, you can change the regs again. But in order to change the regulations, there will need to be a reasoned explanation why. Now, the Biden administration could use the litigation against the new Trump work authorization regulations as a basis to engage in negotiation. And they could agree in those settlement negotiations to rescind all of the new Trump work authorization regulations. Again, I think that would be fairly successful. I think Biden can do that. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that will take time. In order to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act, you have to do at least 2 Federal Register notices. You have to publish the proposed rulemaking, you have to give time to comment, you have to reply to those comments, and publish the final rule. I think the earliest you can go through that process would be 2 to 3 months. More realistically, probably half a year. And while we're on the subject of asylum, let's talk about the Remain in Mexico program, or the Migrant Protection Protocols, the MPP. This is one of the most poorly named programs because it has nothing to do with protecting migrants. It has everything to do with keeping as many Central Americans out of the United States as possible, even if that means keeping them in dangerous conditions in northern Mexico. Now, what was happening is that we were having a rash of Central Americans who were coming to the border with Mexico and looking to apply for asylum. And Donald Trump was forced to accept that people who had a legitimate claim had to be able to apply for asylum in the United States, even if they didn't have a visa. So one of the things he tried to do was to create a program where people were to wait in Mexico while their asylum application was pending before the immigration courts in the United States. This program was created purely by executive fiat. There are no regulations. It was just Trump one day saying, I want this to happen, and then the next day, FAQs were posted on the USCIS website explaining how the program was going to work. The program is also clearly illegal. We have court cases at the appellate level detailing why this goes against the statute. Nonetheless, Trump has continued to make people who are applying for asylum at the border to wait in Mexico while their court cases are pending. Joe Biden has signaled his opposition to this program. And again, Biden can use the litigation as a sort of hook to negotiate a settlement to make sure that the MPP ends. Timing will be of the essence here, because I'm sure the Trump administration has already applied for certiorari before the Supreme Court. And with the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett, the makeup of the court has changed dramatically. This could spell bad things for challenges to Trump's immigration changes. So Biden has every incentive to try to work quickly and come up with a negotiation to end the litigation, with the last word being the Ninth Circuit. That is, I really think we should not tempt fate by putting this issue before the Supreme Court with its current makeup. And Biden can eliminate the MPP. It was created with purely executive action. It can be destroyed with purely executive action. Biden will just have to come up with a reasoned explanation of why he's doing it in order to comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. Now, the problem is with the numbers that I've seen. I believe that there are currently about 66,000 people waiting in Mexico to have their cases heard. And that doesn't count the number of people who continue to arrive at the border but are turned away because the border guards are saying, no, we're only going to take X number of asylum cases a day. And the fact is, if Joe Biden were simply to allow 66,000 people to come across the Mexican border, pay a bond, and then be released in the United States overnight, he's going to face some political consequences. That's not going to be a popular action. So if Joe Biden were serious about ending the Remain in Mexico program, what I would expect is for there to be a process where the 66,000 who are in the program now could come before an immigration judge, apply for a bond, and then have the judge look over, make sure they're not a danger to the public or national security, and, maybe if they have family members in the United States, allow them to come into the United States on a bond. But I wouldn't expect that to happen overnight. I would expect this to be a gradual process. For one thing, it's going to divert resources away from actually conducting the asylum cases. Although that's probably not too much of a big concern, because these asylum cases at the border, they're going to take years to be heard. But again, I would caution patience. I do think there's going to be a process is going to start to address the 66,000 people who are waiting in Mexico. But what about the people who are continuing to arrive, the people who aren't on the list, the people who don't yet have cases pending in immigration court? Well, once again, I don't see the borders being open and all these people just being allowed to come in with a bond. I see a process being created, a process that would include a reasonable fear interview from the asylum office, and then a determination on whether or not to release these people on bond based on whether they're a danger to the public or to national security, and whether they have other ties to the United States, such as other family members. But again, I see this as sort of a phased program. I don't see this ending overnight. I see thousands of people getting their interviews, but I see that taking place probably over a period of months before they can clear out all the backlog of people who are waiting. Okay, so there you go. In order to keep this video to a reasonable length, we're going to break it up into two parts. This is just the first part of immigration issues that Joe Biden will face, and an assessment of how likely he is to deal with those issues. We'll talk about more issues next week. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. If there are any topics you would like me to address in the future, please let me know in the comments below. Now, I don't like talking about this, but I am currently disabled because of complications following cancer surgery. If you're feeling generous, I'll have a link to my PayPal account in the description below. Thank you.